Hello, and welcome to Season 7 of the FODcast, the podcast focused on the future of digital commerce hosted by Simply Commerce. Season 7 promises to continue to bring you some of the industry's brightest minds across the globe as we unpick the sector and where it's heading. From war stories to strategy and technology deep dives to future trends, we cover it all as we continue our journey to have one of the most popular podcasts in commerce. Before we start, if you enjoy our content, please do hit the subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening on, like and share on socials.
Welcome to another edition of the podcast. On today's episode, really pleased to welcome James O'Hare from Sitoo. James, you are the VP of Sitoo, responsible for the UK brand or UK division. And it'd be good to hand over to you to get a little bit of insight into you, your background, and what you do for the business.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Really pleased to be here. Thank you for the invite. So I'm James O'Hare, VP UK for Sitoo, kind of as a business. And what Sitoo is, just to give a bit of a background to the organization before I go on to myself. So Sitoo is a point of sale software application. So essentially, when you go into a checkout into any retail, fashion and lifestyle store, you get to the checkout. The software running on that checkout is the software that Sitoo provides to retailers. Now, why are we different? It's because we've built a platform that we believe that gives staff and store associates the opportunity to give the best possible service. So if you want to see stock, and the fact that it's not in stock in store, but it could be in stock in a nearby store or online or in the data warehouse, we can bring that data into the checkout. If you want to recognize a returning customer to give them a VIP experience, you can take their details, recognize their customer, bring that from the CRM into the store and into the hands of the store associate to give a fantastic experience. So essentially, a unified commerce platform that's what it's trying to achieve, is to bring as much data into the hands of your store associates to create amazing shopping experiences every time, everywhere. That's kind of one of our missions. But I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more of that as we go. So me, I'm based in the East Midlands. Worked in various guises, kind of working with retailers over the last kind of 20 plus years. Before I joined Sitoo in January of last year, I spent 10 years in the mobile messaging space. So those annoying text messages or WhatsApp messages you get from businesses, that I was part of the technology that powered those for 10 years, and then joined Sitoo January of last year, and loving the crazy world of retail.
How do you stop those messages, by the way?
A good opt out
Yeah,
should usually work.
yeah, it doesn't always seem to work for mine.
Yeah. Some are better than others, that's for sure.
But thank you for the intro. Much appreciated. We've got plenty to talk about. Obviously, you and I've had a conversation before we jumped on the podcast, and there's loads of interesting stuff. If we could start with the macro trends, that would be really good. So we talked already about retail, and we both have talked about how we think it's changed already in the recent history. And there'll be quite a lot of change in the next 5, 6, 7 years.
Mm.
What do you think is the biggest driver behind that change and its acceleration of change, more specifically?
Yeah, at the risk of sounding like a ridiculously broken record from a few years ago and the new normal that came with after the pandemic, but that 2020, 2021, it really was a massive inflection point for retail, because as those retail stores closed, I think, and I was not necessarily as close to retail as I was at the time. If you listen to the mainstream media, both at the end of 2020 and into 2021, is because the pandemic had forced so many retailers to rethink their online strategy and started to question the validity of their stores. The expectation was everything was going to move online. And I think also it doesn't really help that the mainstream media, when they're struggling to write any stories, they like to publish stories of the death of the high street, and with no balance either. So, I think a recent example I heard yesterday was the on Oxford Street, the Nike store is going under redevelopment, millions of pounds worth of redevelopment. The news story was Nike closes store on Oxford Street. And so that narrative of the fact that everybody's going to shop online, It's the physical store is dead. The only thing you're going to find on the high street is coffee shops and charity shops and vape shops. That narrative is permeated. But I think what happened, what the in what has actually happened, is that the people, generally society, we our CEO, he likes to say we are herd animals. Okay, so we are social creatures, and what has happened actually is the opposite to that, is that people have started to value social interaction, value shopping experiences in a way maybe they didn't do before the pandemic, because they lost the opportunity, they lost their freedom to go shopping with their friends when they wanted to. And so therefore, that whole piece of going out and having the experience with shopping, has very much come back to the fore, and loads of statistics to back that up in terms of how much people prefer still to shop online. And also is that we've tracked a lot of data on what is the online sales versus in-store sales. And if you look at the graph pre and post Brexit, oh, it's not Brexit, pre and post the pandemic, is actually, it's a straight line graph. It's a straight line graph of the online increasing,
Yeah.
but very much a straight line. So yes, it had a big increase during the pandemic, but then it just resettled to a normal increase, and it still represents only 20 to 25% of all sales are actually made online for most kind of bricks and clicks retailers.
So with that in mind, then, which macro trends do you think people are still underestimating?
I think it's around the whole death of the high street. I think what is dying is bad retail. That is what is dying, rather than physical retail itself. And so I think what we're seeing more and more of successful retailers is, and I don't want to use the word experience, but creating a reason to shop physically. And I think treating the channel as something which is delivers something to consumers that is more than just a transaction. And I'll give you a couple of examples of that. So if you were to go to the Gymshark store on Regent Street, now Gymshark is probably one of the most successful online brands of recent times, and yet they decided to open a physical store, and now have actually gone even further, and they've got plans to open dozens of stores. I think they're already up to like maybe 10. They're going to be up to more than that afterwards. But if you go into the Gymshark store, the way that they've created that store experience is so different to what you would normally expect in other retailers. So when you go into that particular store, there is a gym, an actual gym at the back of that store, for you to actually wear some of the clothing that while working out. There is a juice bar in the store, and there is also fantastic fitting rooms sort of on the top floor. All of the staff have got roaming point of sales, so you can actually go around the store, visit the customer where they are, and even in some cases you can actually check out in the middle of the store, rather than going to the traditional checkout. And so that's one example. Another example is out of town retail. So Go Outdoors, they're a store near York. I visited that quite recently, and that is just, it's a huge square footage, but it's an experience. I spoke to sort of a local kind of that were in the store, and they said often when it's a rainy day, they bring their kids. They bring their kids to go and visit the Go Outdoors store,
I
because
saw that. They look amazing.
on the second floor there is a tent village, an entire tent village on the second floor of that building. It's incredible, the way they've done the garden furniture to appear as if it's outside your house already. So that's what I think the macro trend is that retail is moving more towards, I don't want to say experiential or experiences, but it's definitely something which is providing the consumer with something more than just a transaction. It's a reason to visit the store.
So two questions on that. You didn't want to use the word experience. Why not?
Well, I think sometimes the buzzwords do get a little bit fatigued, and creating experiences, I think, can sometimes just be thrown out there without any real thought. And so that's the reason why I'm pulling back from those buzzwords, because I don't want to appear like I'm, playing buzzword bingo here. But I think it's because it can often be dressed up to mean something different.
Understood.
So I think that whole creating something which is more than just a transaction, I think that's a better that's a better way of describing it as opposed to a label which can get overused.
Yeah, I understand. It's interesting to see your thought process behind that.
Mm.
And then bad retail. So if I think about what has disappeared from our high streets in the past 10 or so years, it's a lot of the concession stores,
Mhm.
big stores with lots of different brands in there. And again, there was no experience, for
Yeah.
want of a better word. Um, is that where your head's at in terms of bad retail, or are there other examples?
Yeah, I think the department store is a really good sort of interesting topic there. I was at another event 2 or 3 weeks ago. We had Dame Sharon White, who was the former chair of John Lewis. And what she thought was that there is a little bit of a renaissance going on in the department store concepts. Obviously, Debenhams have gone, many department store concepts, and really it's only John Lewis that's remained, save another few smaller examples. But we're starting to see a bit of a return to department store concepts. So this is definitely happening in Scandinavia. They've got huge department store concepts in Sweden, for example. There's a retailer called Arleans, that's got dozens of department stores that are very similar to John Lewis. But what John Lewis, the reason why I think John Lewis, not only because of their heritage and their name has survived, but also they're an example of that experience or more than just a transaction. Obviously, they've got kitchen and homewares as a huge part of the John Lewis store. They're actually doing cookery classes
Wow.
and events, community events within those stores. So they're taking what means a lot to them. The John Lewis brand, of course, is like I say, huge in heritage and a bit of a UK national treasure. But they're making sure that the retail is still relevant and
Mm,
still creating a reason that's more than just a transaction. And so I think, yeah, that I think is where I see, you know, and on the flip side, let's, you're a bit afraid just in case you get a call from one of them, but let's take a national electronics retailer that shall remain nameless,
mhm,
um, that rhymes with Burries. And when you go in there, it's apart from their social team that are doing their very best to bring curries, into sort of like more modern mainstream. But if you shop in a curries now, it's almost the same as it was 10 years ago, maybe
mm,
20 years ago,
yeah.
and it's a transaction.
Yes.
And I think I love the stuff there. They're really knowledgeable, but in terms of what you experience when you get there, it's very, very same. It's very the same, and it's very transactional. You know, and that's where I think you could argue the same thing with Woolworths. You could argue the same thing with, other some of those other brands that have disappeared.
Mm,
So I think that's what I think is what's dying. It's those retailers that are not moving with the times.
yeah. I have to say, from a nostalgia point of view, I kind of like the fact that Curry's is still the same. I remember being much younger, running around Curry's and just looking at the new TVs and all the new audio equipment and stuff. But in terms of experience, and we'll go on to this, the next kind of goes into the next question I had for you. If there's a renaissance with kind of like John Lewis, where they've got concessions, department stores, unified commerce has got to play into this, presumably, because one of the biggest gripes with John Lewis is you still have to go to a point of sale, which is often the other side of the shop, and then you get
Mhm.
there are about 17,000 people, and you kind of like, okay, surely there's a better way. I think it's getting better, but like you said with Gymshark, they've got mobile points of sale effectively. You don't need to do that, and
Mm.
you're seeing that adopted in some other shops. So unified commerce presumably plays into that. But if you were going to describe unified commerce to someone non-tech who doesn't really understand commerce, how would you describe it to start with?
Well, I first of all would start with the for many people who coming out looking outside in. I think the likes of Next and some of those other kind of retailers that do the results of unified commerce, like click and collect, click and reserve, you know, um, there's a term called endless aisle, which means you're just placing an online order while you're in store. What they've done is they've made that feel ubiquitous, and they've also made that feel like it's relatively straightforward. And I think the thing I've learned ever since I joined Sitoo January of last year is that neither of those things are true. First of all, not every retailer is able to do this. And also, those that are, it is an incredibly difficult thing to do because the flow of data that sits behind the retailer's operation is really, really complex.
Okay.
And so what you're having to do is you're having to sync and have the data flows across the retailer's website, the retailer's warehouse management system, the retailer's distribution center. Also, you can add into that and making sure that you can unify the payments. So a payment made online versus a payment made in store. You've also got systems which handle all of the stock in the inventory. These are particularly called enterprise resource planning systems or ERP systems. So you're having to sync data flows across all of those systems. And if you're doing it really well, you want to do that in real time to make sure that when you say something is available in store, it is, or if it's available online, that it is. Then add into that mix too, you want to understand who your customer is, because the best possible customer experience is being recognized. Being recognized as a returning customer, you might have a VIP membership, which then might bring with it a discount. So then you're unifying all of the data flows that says what are the past purchases, what are the customer-based recommendations or product-based recommendations, and all of these solutions they've all got technology platforms that the retailer would typically use. And so we're talking, what I've just listed there, you're talking 10, 11, 12 different technology platforms dealing with each part of that particular puzzle. Now, what unified commerce is trying to ensure that you can unify all of that data together. And actually, not necessarily to create a single view, but it's actually making the data flows to be able to be real time and then bring the data across the organization to make it as useful as possible to create the best possible experience. So if you're online and you want to deliver a click and collect solution, you want to be able to deliver the store locations and the stock within those stores instantly to the website. So you can have the customer say, yeah, I'll actually go and collect that at the store in Chelmsford, for example. And if you're in store, you want to instantly understand that James O'Hare is in the store. He's a very, very frequent purchaser. He's a VIP, has 10%, typically buys X, Y, and Z. So you can then deliver a much more personalized experience. So unified commerce is unifying all of those data flows and making them in real time to deliver and create amazing shopping experiences. Because unified commerce, I think, is a term that's used, but ultimately it's about creating amazing customer experiences, which will obviously drive revenue and profitability, in and of itself. And so I think that's what I think unified commerce really means.
Okay. Makes sense. And it's all still heavily driven by the data,
Correct.
access to data in real time and decision making based off of that data.
Yes.
So knowing that, let's assume over the course of the next 5 years, retailers, with the help of people like you, really nail this and they get this right. They use AI, real-time data, and they start to make a big impact on this, on unified commerce and the personalization piece. What, in your view, does a day in the life of someone going shopping on the high street look like in 5 years, in 2030?
It's a very good question.
What's fundamentally different, I think, would be where what I'd like to know is what has fundamentally changed.
I think what is really a really exciting kind of trend is in-store personalization. I think online personalization, I think, is a very well developed kind of concept, a very well developed solution. So as soon as you actually get recognized online, even when you're not even a recognized customer, the use of the cookies and personalization in that way, I think is and all of the technology behind that, I think it's still advancing and it's still changing and evolving, especially with legislation or privacy legislation, which is stopping the amount of tracking that certain websites can do. I think the really exciting trend that, what is it going to be like shopping in the next, 5 years, I think is around I think retailers will be able to seamlessly recognize returning shoppers and offer the personalization that comes with it in a much, much better way. And so I think, there is obviously the privacy and legislation will govern this, but if you take it to its nth degree, you know, if you have given permission for the retailer to recognize you potentially using your mobile phone, that would then automatically ping you to say, "Hey, welcome, James, welcome back."
Yeah.
And ultimately that will then provide you with recommendations as to where you are in store, potentially even having a store location based notifications, or serving you those personalized recommendations as you are around the store. I think if you want to see the most digital store, one of the most digital sort of savvy stores, I would recommend going to see the H&M store in Stratford.
Okay.
I was at an event yesterday. I am at a lot of events, aren't I? I'm talking about that quite a lot. Yeah, avoiding real work. So I was at an event yesterday with the UK CEO of H&M, and he said that is the most digital savvy based store that they've got in the group,
Okay.
kind of at Stratford, and that's where you can actually have digital mirrors, where you can go in, stand in front of the mirrors, and actually try different digital outfits on.
Heard about this. I haven't seen it. I've heard
Yeah,
about
so I definitely think we need to. I think I need to give that store a visit myself. So I think, but I think also one thing that definitely isn't going anywhere anytime soon is human interaction. I think what I believe many retailers are looking at is a way to use technology to give that into the power of the staff associates. To make the staff associates' lives much, much easier, to give the human interaction. This constant sort of feed that I see of AI replacing lots of things. I don't see retailers ever thinking that that's going to happen in the store. I
it.
think it's still going to be a human interaction. As I said, we're social creatures, we're herd animals, and I think what will happen is the technology will enable the humans in store to create a fantastic service.
That will be an interesting one to see play out. So if we think then that over the course of the next 5 years, retailers have got a huge amount to do, and actually it will be very, very beneficial. So all of these technology changes are designed to increase sales and help drive their margins. That's something that's been really difficult for retailers the past 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
Margins in particular, we know. So, in your view, how does mindset trump technology when you're aiming for that kind of friction-free commerce experience that you've just described with all the amazing personalization that comes with it?
Yeah, I think ultimately it comes down to where do they think the gains, where does the return on investment come from those decisions? And I think because ultimately that will help those organizations drive technology change. So I give an example. We were speaking to a beauty retailer, and they identified they do have click and collect right now, but the click and collect process is so convoluted, as I said earlier on. It's so convoluted and so difficult to recall an online transaction in store when a customer turns up to pick up their item. That they felt that, and add to that, to be able to place an online order was also equally difficult.
Right.
And so it's out of stock here, but I'll create an online order for you. Now, this particular beauty retailer tended to have super busy times. And so because that online order was so difficult to place, they lost the sale. Now, they identified that maybe on average, in those busiest stores, which was probably up to 30 to 50 stores, on the busy weekends, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, they were probably losing 4 sales every day in every store.
Okay.
Now, that then multiplied in terms of their average order value and the profitability of every basket, that multiplied to a crazy, crazy increase in revenue, like hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of increased revenue as a result of, if you can make that process really slick and really easy, there is going to be an uplift. And that crazy number, we said, okay, let's not pretend you're going to convert all four. Let's just pretend you'll convert one.
Oh, okay.
One sale per store per Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And it that powered the business case pretty
Well,
much for that kind of transformation. And I think that's what we'll see. I think that's what we'll see is that there has to be a means to an end. I think with some of we can't have technology for technology's sake, and we've seen examples where that just does not work. It's got to be good for the customer. It's got to be good for the staff in the stores, and ultimately give a return. And that's where I think where we'll have the constant balance between, well, that innovation looks really cool. It's this much money, but is it gonna generate us the return that we need, and is it a better customer experience?
makes sense. And money is super tight
Mm,
for a lot of retailers right now. So it has to be a really clear business case that's going to
absolutely.
benefit them and the consumer. And composable has been, and we've talked about this already, but composable has been a big topic.
Mm.
You and I talked about composable 2.0. And so my question is, if we tackle the what seems to be the composable myth, why is it that composable isn't automatically going to be long and expensive in your view? Because that is often a misconception, maybe.
Yeah, I think the truth is, Tim, is that it can be. I think if the journey to composable is the decision making during that journey um, is flawed, or perhaps that journey is impacted by technology and architectural decisions, which might have been made for good intentions. We've always done it that way, or that might be detrimental to our business. What that can lead to is a composable journey being really long and really expensive, because some of these like I say, some of these data flows, they are very, very complex. And so, but there is a different way, I think. And one of our fantastic customers that we've got is Sitoo, is Osprey London. So Osprey London, um, kind of kind of handbags and accessories retailer. They've got around 14, 15 stores in the UK. And they, a number of years ago, began their composable journey. But what they decided to do was to break that composable. They broke it down into the smaller elements, and so they were able to change their ERP system and POS system first. They managed to get through that particular project on time, um, and on budget. And then they began to innovate further after that. So they've now moved on to relaunching their website, with another Swedish kind of friend of ours, which is a Swedish ecom player called Centra. It is a beautiful website, and they're now moving on to a loyalty solution moving forward. But again, the Centra project, that was also on time, on budget. And so I
Okay.
think because of the way in which you can decide to go down the route of composable, I think the decisions that you make are as important as the technology choices and how you integrate. And I think things like the emergence in the last, I would say, 5 years, and probably even more steeper in the last 2 or 3 years, the emergence of integration platforms, the iPaaS kind of part of the industry. Patchworks is probably one of the ones in the UK that we know kind of kind of the most, and they are making composable easier by having pre-built connector to different types of technologies that just needs configuration, or perhaps another sort of element of development, bespoke development to make it work for your business.
Mm.
And so I think so there's different platforms that are helping it, but I think it's the decision making during that technology kind of project is probably as important as the technology choices.
Okay, well, Jim will be pleased with the plug there.
Yeah.
I have to send him a little invoice for that, I reckon. So what you're talking about really is the OMS, the point of sale, the PIM integrations, which allow it to be almost plug and play, or low code, no code is the other terminology. That's
Yeah.
what you're suggesting is going to help collapse the project timelines, which
Yeah,
in turn is going to help get them to value creation quicker, in theory.
I think so, but there's always a compromise though, Tim, as well. It's easy to say there's only a massive benefit to low no code or to the composable journey, because there is always going to be compromises that the retailer has to make because the whole idea of composable and low code, no code, and config and pre-built connectors is that it's built for many, not for few, and so therefore, if your business is just slightly different, you might be having to make compromises, and that's either compromises in how you run as a business, the workflows that you have internally as a business.
Yeah.
That oversimplification might mean that you can't offer the same way that you've done before. On the other side, you could continue to offer what you've done before, but that's going to take a bit more time. It's going to take a bit more time of bespoke development. Perhaps you might need agency help to make sense of these pre-built connectors and put a lens of your retail, your way of doing business over that. And so I think, yeah, it's not just a one-way street of, sort of everybody doing the conga, lovely composable world. There's compromises involved here, and I think that's maybe, again, I think composable commerce and omnichannel and all of these buzzwords that I think they're all fatigued because we just continue to talk about them as if there's no downside.
Mm.
And I think, there often is compromise in some shape or form. And I think that's why I think we try to have those upfront conversations and fairly direct conversations up front, because we don't want to get down the line to find that it's not the rosy picture that they thought it was going to be.
And on the notes of buzzwords that have been overused, omnichannel was something that I third maybe heard that 7 or 8 years ago, and it's been a huge buzzword. And we talked about this the first time we caught up, and I think what you said is that particular thing, omnichannel, will effectively disappear in your view.
Mm.
So I'd be interested to know, if it does, what's going to replace omnichannel?
It's a very, very good question. I heard a retailer describe that, we were at a conference, another event, at a conference, and it was called the Omnichannel Conference, and like 4 or 5 retailers in a row all said, "Oh, I hate the word omnichannel." And I saw the event organizer sort of shifting awkwardly in their seat, as if to say, oh, "Okay, maybe we should change the name of this thing." And it was the retailer of Browns, I think it was, the CEO or the UK MD of Browns, who said it should just be called retail. Now, I think we can maybe come up with something a little bit more imaginative than that, but I think it's rather than give it a name, if you'll indulge me, Tim, rather than give it a name as to what it will be, I think it's just around treating the customer regardless of channels. The channel shouldn't really. It's a factor, but it's the customer experience that matters most, and the channels are a part of that, but it isn't necessarily their own thing, if you know what I mean. And I think that's where omnichannel, it still gives the impression that it's siloed. It's you've got your online transactions over here and you've got your store over here. And we'll just build a bridge between the two. And just by offering both online and in store, and maybe some bridge in between, suddenly you're an omnichannel retailer. But as I said earlier on, just because you offer click and collect, if it's terrible experience, then what good is that? You might be an omnichannel retailer, but it's actually a poor experience. And I'm sure we've all got examples of where the click and collect kind of journey is horrendous. So it's just because you're omnichannel doesn't mean you're doing good retail. And that's why I think just maybe, obviously the channels are important, but it's more to do with the overall customer experience that you're giving. And that experience layer sits across every channel.
But will omnichannel actually disappear if there's still always predominantly one major channel? So you take all of the historical high street retailers, their main channel for revenue generation is still the high street in store. Gymshark's probably the opposite because it
Yeah.
started as an online store. So isn't it going to be difficult for omnichannel to disappear as a concept if you're still driving 70% of your revenue from one channel?
But I think what that does is I think omnichannel, I think is still, I think having availability, having an experience that goes across multiple channels, you could still call it multi-channel if you'd, sorry, omnichannel if you'd like. I just think thinking about it differently in a customer, thinking about the customer experience at its heart, because we haven't talked about social, for example. The social channel is still a channel which is still so young. TikTok Shop potentially, I think it was like less than 18 months ago, TikTok Shop didn't exist. And so that is a whole different channel, a whole different learning, and a whole different generation that is going to have different shopping experiences and different ways of interacting with those retailers. So I think that's where the reason why I think omnichannel is maybe sticks in the throat a little bit,
Yeah.
for some of these retailers, because it's just been used as a, I don't know, it's just been used as a single thing, a single silver bullet that is going to solve everyone's problems, and I think it's a bit more nuanced than that.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. It's just interesting to pick it apart a bit.
Mm,
One of the things that I discovered more recently is online social selling in real time, like QVC,
yeah.
but on social platforms. Now, I put out a post about this, and it doesn't seem to be getting as much traction in Europe as it is in Asia.
Mm.
And I'd be interested to get your view on whether you think that's going to be something we'll see more of.
I think it's user generated content, isn't it? So it's that is something which has been increasing, and something which we've seen, even my I'm an avid interest in golf, for example, and many years ago, up until very recently, if you were a golf equipment manufacturer, you would pay the very top golfers in the world, maybe in the top 100, you would pay them to use their golf equipment. And that was seen as a sponsorship, almost like a sponsorship package. That revenue, that money that they were paying maybe to the top 100 players, has now completely been diverted away from all but maybe the top 10. So
Okay.
the 90 that were getting the sponsorships, they now can maybe use the equipment for free, but they won't get paid for it. And all of that sponsorship money has been completely diverted to user generated content, which is, YouTube, TikTok, and all of the hype that goes with those particular videos that get millions and millions of views. My son is glued to them.
Mm.
Um, that kind of shift in how user generated content could actually then drive shopping behavior, is really, really interesting. There's a company called Bizarre Voice that are specialists in that. And to hear them talk about the way in which that user generated content can be created and curated by retailers to generate further revenue, and crucially it's an attributed revenue stream, so you can actually see from that user generated content it's generated X amount in sales.
Mm.
So it's a really interesting area that that the social channels and user generated content is an interesting area for many retailers, and I think Gymshark are the ones that are probably in the retail space that I think is a really good example. So their influencers that they have as a Gymshark influencer, they've probably got about 20, I think, maybe more. You can go on
Mm.
their website and you can see all the influencers. They've got their own profile, they've got their own social following. There was a lady on there who did a 5K. She said, "I'm going to do a 5K in this park." Like 5,000 people turned up. It was it's crazy. So I think that side of things, because obviously in dealing with physical retail, we don't necessarily see all that much, but we do have the ability for retailers to use influencer codes, when people are actually in store. But
Mm.
that is a really interesting area as to how that carries, how that develops, because you've got that social following, but also if people know they're being sold to, is there an authenticity problem? there too. So yeah, it's just a really fascinating area, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I am susceptible to Instagram and buying things on Instagram that I don't necessarily need, and then them turning up, I'm like, yeah, it's not ideal, but it also does bring me stuff that I find of interest. So the algorithm works. So yeah, double-edged sword. But if we could look at briefly again at physical retail,
Mm.
it does fall in line with what we're talking about. So if we assume that the retailers need to get to value creation as quickly as possible, because of budget restraints, and that's part of the conversation. Uh, in your view, and we talked about things like returns hubs with repairs, rental, and using the in-store facilities to facilitate those things. Which would you advise would give the quickest ROI to retailers that are considering their options at the moment?
I think there's a few things, and of course I'm going to be hugely biased towards the features and kind of what Sitoo can do, and I make no apologies for that. Um, I think the things that we see um, gain some of the most returns for retailers is actually reducing the amount of tasking the store associates have to do in store. Now, the tasking is all of those store operation tasks that you may see when you're in store, but ultimately they should be in the background because most of the store staff should be dealing with customers and selling to customers and providing that customer experience. Um, those great customer experiences is the majority of their job. I'm speaking to a 200 store retailer just now, and they told me that 70% of the time their store associates are actually doing the tasking work. So,
Okay.
so this is receiving inbound shipments to make sure you can update the stock values when they're received in store. Maybe um, uh, kind of finance information. So they have to process refunds in such a way that takes up a lot of time.
Hmm.
Um, when new prices or products are added, they're having to spend a lot of time kind of in the background of the POS to actually update the tables, update the solution because the particular solution they have is a little bit of an aged one. So they're spending 70% of their time doing non-sales activity.
Okay.
And that's where I think the greatest return is. And so one of our flagship customers that we were able to announce last year was Puma. And so while they don't have many retail outlets in the UK, I think they've got about 15. Globally, they've got like thousands of stores. And so we've been selected as the global POS kind of point of sale provider, which is totally awesome. And we visited the store in Carnaby Street. And they said that the old process to receive inbound shipments, and they're receiving thousands of units, thousands of SKUs every week. The old process with a printed off manifest, ticking off, the items that they receive, it used to take them maybe 2.5 hours every single shipment 3 times a week in every store. With having something modern, with having something which can handle both store operation tasks as well as your checkout, which a modern point of sale can do, it can have those different use cases.
Mm,
They've actually reduced that time to less than half an hour.
okay.
Every store, 3 times a week. That tasking time has been transformational for them. And every time we've gone into the store, we've, that is the thing that the store manager says, if I was to pick, one thing, it's this.
Yeah.
Just removing the tasking time within the store. So I think that's where the biggest return could be, is giving your store staff more time selling.
Okay. And this may well then answer the next question because we couldn't have a podcast and not talk about AI,
Of
obviously.
course. Yeah.
Um, we're looking for what would you give as the top concrete example for use of AI in store? There's lots and lots of uses, but what would be your number one choice right now if you had to pick one?
Yeah, I've found over the last 18 months kind of into this part of retail is that it feels like retailers are trying to find a problem for AI to solve. Um, we should be using AI because we should. um, that was my first comment. But I would say that the bits that I see are really exciting is around product recommendations. And so um, right now, as soon as everybody has seen it for many, many years, but I think it being more sophisticated and in real time in store, of when you are a recognized customer, for those recommendations to be personalized, in a way of using those algorithms, using machine learning with the old AI, machine learning, to understand what is the best possible recommendation for that particular customer. I think that is the really the really exciting part, because right now when you're going in, if you're using an old style, um, if you're not using something modern which can provide you at least with product recommendations of actually saying, customers who bought this, here's some related products, here's how to complete the outfit. We can do that now, but in the future I think we're going to be able to seamlessly bring in both customer based recommendations as well as product based recommendations, and actually have almost build your wardrobe sort of right there in store, using mobile POS with an iPad or with something to actually then create something which is using that machine learning and AI to give the best possible next action, which I think will ultimately drive sales.
And do you see this as the consumer having this information fed to them by their device, or do you see this as a new skill set for the sales staff having the information fed to them so they can upsell and say, hey, have you thought about this? Have you thought about these shoes? Have you thought about this accessory?
I think both, in the case that the consumer has a really strong affinity with the brand. I think for those brands where you are just a casual shopper, yes, you might have an account. You're not going to download an app. You're not going to download the brand app and keep it on your phone. But for those that you've got a really strong an affinity with, you feel like it's your values, and you'd shop there forever. I think you would maybe have the app downloaded to your phone, and therefore you could use the two in combination. I think. I think it's really easy to say, oh yeah, put it on the app. People don't keep apps on their phone.
No.
I know this from my time in mobile messaging industry. It's something crazy. It's something crazy like 89% of all apps are either unused or deleted within 3 months or something. I'm probably going to get pulled up on that stat now, because I'm sure I'm pulling it from an old memory of mine from 2023 backwards. But yeah, the real estate on someone's phone is highly, highly guarded, and people do not keep the apps on their phone for very long.
And it's also, for me anyway, looking at it personally, we're entering into a world where I think people are actively trying to be off their phones more.
Yeah.
So I don't want to be out shopping, having the physical experience, probably out with my family, than being stuck to my phone. So I would certainly prefer that personalization to be, if you've got the salesperson who's no longer having to do 70% of their time doing back office and admin work out selling. So that means they need to develop a different skill set because they're going to be doing a different job, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Interesting. So if we talk about use cases, so we were talking about some of the recent rollouts that you guys have done, proving that composable projects can be both quick and cost effective. So you've mentioned one with Centra. Have you got any other examples of the rollouts being on time to budget and that help the clients understand that it is possible if the right business decisions are made up front?
Yeah, so one of our US-based customers, if I go over the pond, is a sports retailer called Rally House.
Okay.
So they have got now upwards of, I think, 400 stores now. They're one of the fastest growing retailers in the US, actually. And so if you can imagine, in every city in America, you've got 4 or 5 major sports team that is affiliated with that particular city. In basketball, baseball, American football, and in many cases ice hockey. And so what their business is to provide the sports memorabilia, shirts, and all of those other things in each and every one of those cities for those sports teams. Boasting that they often have more merchandise than the actual teams themselves because of their business model. And so also and they're live. All of those stores are live over 18, 19 American states. And so they were able to use that, they're now ambassadors of MAC, which is the alliance that's been put together, which is trying to push forward composable thinking. So microservices, API first, cloud native, and headless. That's the acronym for MAC, but it's an organization that is a membership organization, which is of tech vendors that are aligned with that vision. And so they're fully Mac sort of enabled, and that what enabled that to do is actually roll out those stores, which is a brand new POS. I think they signed the contract in April. They were live in August.
April.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was like over 300 stores, 250, 300 stores in 18, 19 different states. And just so for those uninitiated, each and every state has different tax liabilities associated to the sales tax. There's lots of complication, but that is, I think, one of our best examples, and we got a full video case study online on Sitoo.com if you want to go on to have a look at it, showing that with the right technology decisions and with the right kind of investment in both Rally House's team, but also the investment for our project teams in Sitoo, the projects can be delivered. That value creation can be very, very fast.
And are there any particular metrics, obviously the timescale we've got, any particular metrics that you are able to talk about that you potentially also talk to future clients about from that particular example?
Not that we're commercially able to say on a live podcast, Tim, no.
I thought I'd ask. But it's interesting. I mean, that's a very quick delivery.
Yeah.
But presumably a big chunk of that comes from the upfront conversation around what are the business outcomes and what is the technology stack that you want to utilize.
Yes.
Was it quite a complicated set of technologies?
Yeah, that's right. So they had obviously they had their ERP system was NetSuite, and so we had to ensure that our data flows were working seamlessly with those. And I think they also had a number of different other solutions. I forget the actual name of the technologies for their order management, for their warehousing. But I think also I think there's maybe that fast time. It's always evolving. It's an evolving picture. And I think we're continuing to evolve with Rally House to actually further develop their tech stack. So, whether that is loyalty, whether that is how they're doing their unifying their payments or their in-store loyalty, it's something which we pride ourselves on, is that we're able to work with you over the long term. It isn't just a project implementation done. It's usually over a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 kind of solution, because that then allows you to break down what you really need for that phase 1 and then start to innovate from there.
Okay. So the other thing that we haven't touched on that we talked about before, which I definitely want to finish on, would be the differences between the Nordics and the UK.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been doing a lot more work in Sweden and Finland and a little bit in Denmark in the past 18 months. So I'm starting to get a feel for what I think the differences are. And you and I spoke about this previously. What would you, if you could transplant one Swedish habit into a UK business, what would it be and why?
I think it's the Swedish, the cultural side of things is dead interesting. And from working in that mobile messaging space, the opt-ins, the marketing preferences, also featured a huge part of my life in that industry as well.
Yeah.
And if I could take one thing, it would be how open the Scandinavians are, just from a cultural, just because the way their society works are with sharing customer data. So in Sweden, for example, every time you go into a store, you've got a known purchase where you're able to recognize this is James and he's actually a member and we've added the transaction to his account, and then an unknown transaction where someone's just come in, scanned it, and they're off. The unknown transaction leaves a lot of value on the table because you're not then associating it to my account and therefore be able to produce something, recommend products to me in the future, which is all of that data, building up that picture of what I like to do and what I like to purchase, and therefore what the next best action is. In Sweden, in the UK, I would say the average of known purchases is probably somewhere between 45 and 55% when we look at Sitoo data. So that means usually half the time you don't know who's shopping with you. Now that can be much lower for certain retailers and it can be a little bit higher for others.
Okay.
In Sweden, it's like 90% plus.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and it's because of the cultural, the society of actually sharing your data is much more open, and just much more, oh, well, it's just not an issue. Whereas I think, the amount of people complaining because they've had too many text messages and they want to opt out, is so much higher in the UK, I think. And therefore that is what's driving that unknown and known purchases. And that's why, because of things like cookies legislation and privacy legislation, that's why that is also another, huge opportunity for retailers, is if you can increase that first party data collection at the point of purchase to begin to remarket to them, to begin to, increase the lifetime value of that customer, it's gold dust. And I think, and that's another thing around, and again, shameless plug, we see C2 customers, because we've got mobility that using tablets to be able to provide to the store associates things like, oh, just type your email in here, just by flipping the iPad, just flipping it towards the customer, just something as simple as that. But also we're developing a loyalty solution which is called Sitoo recognition, which enables you to use your payment provider to actually then create onboard and recognized returning customers using a digital loyalty card that sits in the Apple Wallet. Now that obviously you've got your boarding passes and all that, so it's not new. It's not new information, but it is new for in-store retail.
Yeah.
Because online loyalty, they've got it pretty good. If you try to leave the website, it's offering you to sign up to a newsletter for 10% off. It's not so easy in store, especially when there's a queue. So imagine a world in which you actually you use your Apple Pay to pay for your items. The payment terminal will search for a loyalty card automatically without being asked, are you a member? No, you don't need to do that. It will search for it. And if it's there, it will add it to the basket and your checkout, becoming a known purchase, all through a single tap.
Yeah, that's good. That will make a huge difference. And I've always wondered why that wasn't the case. I think some companies focused on receipts, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, maybe even a bit longer, on making them digital. And it's not just about the receipt; it's just about retaining all the information and exchanging it between the retailer and me. And if that is a dual exchange where my loyalty card is accepted, and then my receipt is automatically tracked digitally against that loyalty card, that's going to make my life easier because I have to carry my physical receipt around with me.
Yeah, absolutely. And the world of digital receipts is another fascinating area. We work with a partner of ours called Slip, and the founder there, Tash Grossman, she's utterly amazing. But that whole idea of using the digital receipt as a marketing tool, is also an area which seems to be untapped. And so we've got a really good close relationship with Slip, and their solution is fantastic. So definitely would recommend that solution to anyone. But that idea of making in-store loyalty just that much more easier, because right now there's so much friction to it, and it's so much harder to generate that in-store loyalty. And we believe using payment technology, using that kind of technology is going to help.
Yeah, 100%. So that's the advantage Sweden has over the UK.
Yeah.
If I flip it around, what advantages does the UK retail sector have over Sweden in your view at the moment?
I think it has to be scale. Even if you just looked at the GDP of the UK, versus the Scandinavian countries, I think with the scale of the UK, those retailers are able to also experiment, with the number of stores that they have, so I think that's where. But also, as I was with yesterday the UK CEOs for a breakfast event. They presented the UK CEOs for IKEA and for H&M at this Swedish Chamber of Commerce event. And I think we don't necessarily here in the UK quite understand the place that London has within the eyes of these global retailers. It's the jewel in the crown. They describe the IKEA UK CEO. They've just opened a brand new store, if you can believe it. You've seen all those out of town stores, and the funneling that they do, and huge warehouses. They've actually opened a store on Oxford Street within the last 2 or 3 weeks as a store to be front of mind for UK retailer, for UK consumers. The UK CEO described that store opening, which I think only happened like 2 or 3 weeks ago, as one of the most symbolic store openings in for IKEA total, for IKEA Group of recent times.
Wow.
And the UK CEO of H&M described London is their brand city. It's a brand city, and that's where their innovation is. We talked about their digital store in Stratford earlier on. So I think and the amazing stat that every 5 minutes in that half square mile where Oxford Street, Regent Street, Bond Street, every 5 minutes, 65,000 people pass by that part of London every 5 minutes, 200 million a year. That sort of scale, I think, is what makes UK retail so exciting. And you better be on top of your game. Because as Henrik, the CEO of H&M said, you've got to scream, you've got to be there.
Yeah.
You've got to be pushing yourself forward each and every day. And we talked about the challenges of retail, no more so than trying to kind of keep up the fight with all the other retailers in that part of London. That's for sure.
Amazing. Thank you very much, James. That was insightful. And for me, really, really interesting. I think it will be for all of our listeners and viewers too. Apologies, we have to finish. I could probably go on for another hour or so.
No, thank you, Tim, for the invitation. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks, James.
Thanks.